Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. My name is Jenna Labor, and I will be your host as we explore the dynamic world of Don Keenan's trial philosophy, The Cutting Edge. Episodes are released each week after our live broadcast. So as always, if you have somebody you think needs to hear about what's going on today, didn't have a chance to hop on live, please let them know that they can watch it next week. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button and the alerts icon so you don't miss an episode. Today, we have Andrew Gould with us to talk about negative focus group responses. And, we sometimes get these responses in our focus groups and what do they really mean, right? Are they actually negative? Does it mean that we're doing something wrong? Does it mean that we need to do something just a little bit differently? Does it mean we need to can the case altogether and just give up on the practice of law? I don't know. Let's hear what Andrew has to say about it. Now, if you're not getting negative responses in your focus groups, I have to tell you, you are not doing them right. We want to be getting negative focus group responses because we want to get those responses in focus groups before we put our case in front of a jury. So this is a very timely topic, as all of us should be doing these focus groups for our clients on a regular basis. Now, Andrew practices law in Georgia. He's also on KTI faculty, but he was a Keenan Law Firm associate way back. And I misspoke last week saying he was a fellow because I didn't know that there were associates. But actually, when I met Andrew years ago, he was an associate. So he was there from 2012 to 2018. We'll put his contact information below, as always, so you can contact him directly if you have any follow-up questions after this episode or have any questions about Edge in general. So Andrew, tell us about what we do with negative focus group responses, either in the focus group itself, how to respond to them, or afterwards when we're talking to our client or digesting what happened during a focus group.
Yeah, so it depends, it depends on the type of focus group that you're running. If you're running a narrative style focus group, then obviously what you want to get is as much bad stuff as you possibly can. You want to identify what those issues are, and you want to identify how much emotion is behind it. You want to identify what facts are driving it, what holes in the facts is typically what it is. There's holes in the facts that are driving it, and you do those narrative focus groups out of the gate, I would recommend, because they're going even before you file a lawsuit, so that you have that information for discovery purposes. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to put it into your written discovery, but it sure as hell is helpful for preparing for depositions, particularly 30v6, or any kind of witnesses that the focus group says in its narrative who they want to hear from. One of my common questions is, what more information do you want to know? I mean, that's the most common, right? But who do you want to hear from and why? They're going to poo-poo all over the case. I don't really care about that in a narrative style. What I care about is understanding the why, where the holes are, how to plug them, right? So that I can then come back in what I call kind of a revised narrative focus group. Not quite an opening statement. A lot of folks, equate the two. They're not the same, but it's a revised narrative presentation where you kind of lead with what you believe to be the strengths in your case, but also come in behind with the whole kitchen sink about all the other facts, just to see what sticks, what doesn't stick, what you can drop, what you can't drop, whatever. So the negative information that I get in a narrative style is whatever, right? That's what I'm expecting. If I'm not getting it, I didn't do it right. Even in a car wreck case, even in your quote unquote can't lose case, system failure, this, that, and the other. If you're not getting bad information, you didn't do it right. So in other words, you're running a focus group to get what you want, not what you need. As it relates, you kind of get down the road of focus groups. Now you're starting to get into opening statements. You're starting to get into maybe you're testing demonstratives. Maybe you're starting to get into a full-blown adversarial. And now you're starting to hear some of this negative stuff, right? And a lot of people panic. Oh my God, this, that, and the other. I don't think it's necessarily the time to panic. So what I often do is, all right, they're saying this stuff, whatever. They say this stuff in jury selection too. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person's a bad juror or whatever, right? It's sort of like when you ask the global question, if the evidence supports it, are you comfortable returning a verdict for $1 million or whatever? And then people try to strike those folks who say no. Right? I don't know if that question necessarily gets you people off that you want off, because you want to dive in deeper to those individuals. So folks, I think the most recent example was this distracted driving thing, right? Oh my God, people are saying distracted driving is not this big issue. I don't necessarily buy into that, right? I've heard it too in my focus groups. It's becoming obviously more and more common. We're seeing it on the roadways in the signs, at least down here, GDOT signs talking about, it's a wireless state, all these different kind of warnings about don't drive distracted. So the awareness is out there. I think there is some misconception, though, about whether that awareness has watered down the fear that distracted driving creates. Because oftentimes what I find is in a car wreck case, you're trying to create a system failure. The system failure is oftentimes the systemic issues that we have with whatever that driving is, distracted driving. You start bringing in the statistics and you show just how big of an epidemic we have, right? That often people misperceive. They know it's bad, but they didn't realize it was that bad. That has the potential of changing their POV. So really what I'm after is, all right, your POV appears to me to at least be through the eyes of the defendant driver, right? Because they don't really care, oh my God, this could be me. So then it's like, all right, well, let's dive into why, right? What is it about your personal experience that starts you off in that POV? And you got to dig, right? And I'm not necessarily picking on the person, but it's simple questions. Why? Tell us more about that. Have you ever been in a position similar to this? Have you known anybody that's been in a situation similar? You're just sort of sniffing around to see what you get, right? And then eventually what you're going to have is other folks in the focus group that are going to chime in. And so it gives you great ammunition to pit one another against one another, to really challenge each other's beliefs and get crosstalk where you just get to stand back and shut up and you just listen. And you don't listen for purposes of jumping in. You listen for purposes of taking notes, but letting them go until it kind of on its own trickles out, and then you can kind of come in behind. But what I often find is when you use these tools at your disposal, jurors are not eager to just waive safety in their world, right? Of course, you always have these, and I don't know what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to, but these shit happens jurors, right? But I guess maybe I'm optimistic. I don't know if anybody would ever call me an optimist, but I don't see a whole lot of the shit happens jurors. They're there. I encounter them, right? And you can usually spot them pretty quickly. They're just they tend to be just generally unhappy. And so you can kind of identify that personality, I would argue, pretty quickly. But I wouldn't say that there's this whole ton of them. You got a jury pool of 40 or 60 people. I wouldn't be worried that there's 30 of them in there. So with the exception of those, people often will say, yeah, it's this problem. What the hell can you do about it? Blah, blah, blah. We just got to live with it, this, that, and the other. But when you challenge them, if that's the case, if that's true, if you really believe that, we have laws on the books. You don't do this argumentatively, right? You do this, okay, I hear you. And if that's true, let me challenge you a little bit. If that's okay, and they'll give you permission, obviously, to, yeah, okay. We have these laws on the books. You see it all the time on these highways. Yes, yes, yes. If all this is not preventable, then why even have the laws, right? What do they, if anything, what do they do? What do they accomplish, if anything? And then you're going to see, oftentimes, you got 12, 15 focus group jurors, which is what I try to get, 12 to 15. You're going to see heads nodding like this, right? And you may see her kind of do this kind of number. But that's where the group discussion comes in. Like, why have these laws if it doesn't matter? That's how you challenge these people. And in my experience, with the rare exception of shit happens folks, which they're there, right? Oh, well, nobody follows the law, so what does it matter? Blah. Okay, I can't cure that person. But for the most part, then you start getting into a real conversation, a deep conversation where folks' initial blink impressions are challenged, right? And then you can listen to what that person has to say, that initial person has to say. And oftentimes there are some of the points that you're going to want to echo throughout trial. It's going to be obviously in your jury selection. You're going to want to embed it there. But then you're going to have it in your opening statement. You're going to echo it through the presentation of your trial. You're going to attack defense witnesses with those kind of concepts, but you're really going to drive it home in closing, because those are the things that empower those jurors. So you get to the end of the day, and those jurors, you may still have a juror on there that's like, okay, this happens all the time. What the hell am I supposed to do with it? Those are going to be the things that you use to empower those jurors to do something about it. Or alternatively, you're giving tools to your jurors who are on your side to go into that deliberating room and use with those folks. In other words, you give them an opportunity to do something with these laws, right? But you're not coming up with stuff on your own. You're listening to folks who are skeptical, and then give you those responses. Or in the group setting where I get to say, well, what about the rest of you? The rest of you will give you those arguments to be made. And I think it's extremely powerful. But the skill is shut up. That's the skill. And it's easier said than done, right? Because you want to follow up on this point. You want to follow up on that point. You don't want to forget this, that, and the other. I get it. You just got to shut up.
And do a lot of focus groups so that when somebody says something negative, it stops eliciting an emotional response from you. And I mean, I'm just speaking from personal experience. When I first started doing focus groups, if a focus group member said something terrible about my case or my client or my facts, my initial gut response was to argue with them about it and to take that negative response and fight with them. Well, what about this fact? So, I mean, what about that, Andrew? What would you say to somebody who's feeling that way when they get a negative response?
Yeah. There's a famous scene in a Seinfeld episode where George tells Seinfeld, it's not a lie if you believe it. So I go into every focus group convincing myself these aren't my cases. I separate the emotion. And you've got to kind of do that. You've got to separate and again, easier said than done, but I go in with the full understanding that they're going to poo-poo on my cases. And I'll tell you this right now, I'd much rather know that than the positives. I'd much rather know that. And once you kind of get to that point, all that kind of pushback, it goes away. And even if at the end of it, they're writing down all the liability and it's 100% or 90% or whatever on your client, I don't really care, because now I've understood the why. And once I have that information, then I have myself a roadmap to how to fix it. It doesn't necessarily mean every single case you're going to be able to fix, right? I can remember when I was still with the Keenan Law Firm, we had a case referred to us, I think it was out of Alaska. Don would probably remember better than me, but it involved, I forget all the facts, but bottom line is it involved like birds pooping onto a farm that then led to those crops being sent to the farmer's market that then client purchases, and whatever the poop in the bird poop was toxic, and our client somehow winds up like quadriplegic or paraplegic, some crazy thing, I forget. It's something to do with, I don't know. Again, it was years ago. Don wanted to take that case, I think primarily because he wanted to try a case in Alaska, which I didn't blame him. It would have been cool. And so we focused that case, 7, 8, 9, 10 different times, because we kept losing and we wanted to keep, all right, let's change this, let's change that, and change this, change that. And you just couldn't ever overcome it, because at the end of the day, the theme of that case was buyer beware when you come to a farmer's market. And no matter how many different ways we presented it, no matter how many new facts we got on the farmer who knew about this, He was told to fix this. He was told to address this. He knew how dangerous it was, just could not overcome the emotional impact of go to a farmer's market. This is kind of what you sign up for. And so, ultimately we turned down the case. But those are few and far in between, right? I mean, those are few and far between. So oftentimes, I take that negative information and it becomes your roadmap for discovery, becomes your roadmap for depositions. And then once you've plugged those holes, you come back to a focus group, and now you've got a whole new POV and emotional buttons that really what you're after now is, all right, which bad facts are still driving some of the emotion, right? And they could be driving it not necessarily from a liability perspective, but from a damages perspective. So you kind of you got to get a sense of that. But then just as, if not more importantly, at that stage, what is driving the emotion in my case? Like, what are the positive things? So that I can start kind of trimming the fat. These are the 1, 2, 3 facts. That's really all I need. Let's simplify this case. And if all I get is 1, 2, 3, game over. It's like Don says, right? You want to win your case in the first 5 minutes of your opening. My goodness. And so those 1, 2, 3 facts are going to be the way that you get there. But the only way you get there is through having these negative jurors give you this information, plugging those holes, coming back around, revising your narrative presentation. That revised narrative presentation is going to eventually lead to your opening statement. And that's how you start to really simplify your case. It's a lot of work to get to that simplification. And the more complex the case, the harder it is, obviously. But that's the beauty of this negative pushback from jurors, is they really do help you simplify your case.
Right. So a negative response is often an opportunity, especially if you're doing it early on, when you still have, either pre-filing or early in discovery, when you have time to obtain the information that juror needs, right? Getting a negative response, as you talked about earlier, you want to find out why they have that response, but also what else they might need, right? Maybe they say, well, I don't like this fact because it lacks X, Y, Z. Well, if you're early enough in discovery, you might be able to go out and get X, Y, Z. Or maybe you have X, Y, Z and you just didn't present it because you didn't know it was important yet. And so that perceptively negative response, which appeared to take your case, at the outset, really isn't that negative. It's the opportunity to refine the case, to learn more about it. Now, folks, you do eventually want to get good focus group responses. So don't take what we're saying about you need to get the negatives out to be like every focus group needs to be negative. It just occurred to me as we've been talking about negative focus group responses and encouraging people to get negative responses from their focus groups. Eventually, yes, you want to get to a point where you set out the facts and your focus group is 100% on your side. But that shouldn't, with maybe very few exceptions, it shouldn't be in the beginning. Andrew, can you tell me an example of any time you've had a case where it was always a positive focus group response without any sort of negative attribution or anything? And it was still you still had done it correctly, but it was just such a good case?
Oh, correctly? No.
Okay.
No, that doesn't happen. I've seen it. So teaching focus groups in the past in the KTI college, I've seen it there, but those are because folks ran a focus group to get what they wanted, not what they needed, which is fine. That you're there to learn, and it's a great learning opportunity. Or worse yet, they do present a neutral focus group, but then they only focus on the folks who are positive. Mm-hmm. And that's a very, I guess from this topic's perspective, that's kind of one of the number one takeaways is, it's all well and good when people make you feel warm and fuzzy about your case. But those aren't the folks, particularly early on, that's not who you want to focus on. Mm-hmm. You really those are the folks that you use as tools to pit against those who are negative. That's all. Those are the folks that, all right, I want to know what your 1, 2, 3 is so that I can compare that to the negative 1, 2, 3. Because that's going to help you understand the POV. Oh, okay, you're attaching to these 3 facts. You're over here attaching to these 3 facts. Got it. That helps.
Mhm.
But now let's start diving into these people. All right, what is it about their personal experiences that causes this person to attach to these three facts and causes this person to attach to these three? And how much of an imprint on the brain is that for each of them, to the extent, like, how strongly do they hold those opinions? And can that switch? So anyhow, no, I've never had one that was correctly done. I don't care how simple the case is, your rear end collision case, I don't care. You know, even if they give 100% liability because they're like, well, if you rear end somebody, you know, blah, 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 you hit somebody from behind, you're responsible, don't care. You can get a sense of, yeah, but, you know, this is, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much am I irate about this? Yeah, it's a 2, it's a 3. You know, what do I feel about this? What's my gut check? And so you start to get a sense of, okay, everybody's kind of down on this. All right, let's try to figure out why, right? And oftentimes you'll get these like, well, it's a routine car wreck case. All right, well, what makes you say that? And, you know, what if different would kind of start to change your opinion and start to kind of sprinkle stuff in of, all right, well, what if true? And you kind of give some facts, play a devil's advocate, right? You can kind of supplant facts that maybe you think you're going to get during discovery and start saying, well, what if, you know, playing devil's advocate, what if blank? How, if at all, would that affect your perception of the case? Would it still be kind of a run-of-the-mill routine thing? And just see, right? I mean, oftentimes they're not going to want to come off of it, and that's fine. But I don't necessarily need to be looking for whether they come off of their opinion. I want to see their body reaction and, all right, are they as adamant about their position as they were before? And that's the key thing. So you're not just, I mean, you're watching for how they say these things. You're listening for how they say these things, because I can all but guarantee you it's human nature, right? If I said it was a routine wreck and now this lawyer's coming in behind and throwing, it's still a routine wreck. It's still routine. Mm-hmm. You know, you know, that, you know, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but it's kind of still routine. Well, that tells me, all right, well, there's some traction, there's some potential traction here, where if that was the initial thing they heard, then their blink impression of the case is going to be potentially different, right? That whole Malcolm Gladwell blink. So, you know, you starting to get a feel for, okay, this is a fact that may hit, versus you throw out a fact and they're still the exact same, you know, same body language, same tone. You don't see any heads kind of like, you don't see anybody kind of looking up thinking, well, okay, that's dead in the water, most likely. So, but no, to answer, that's a long-winded answer to your question of have I ever presented a case correctly and not gotten negative? No, never. And if you do, again, even a run-of-the-mill car wreck case, they're like, oh, well, they put 100% on the defendant. I don't care. That's not necessarily what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is the emotional gut check and what can I do to raise that. I mean, you may not get it to a 10. You may never get it to a 10. But if I can move it from a 3 to a 6, well, now arguably I've added to the value of the case, the damages, and I can justify, if I got to go to trial, I can justify asking for more. I'm not insulting the jury. So it can still be a negative thing if they're coming in at 2-3. And that's why you kind of have to listen about, all right, what is it about this case that makes it, quote, routine? What do we mean when we say routine? What do we think of when we hear the word routine car wreck? Those types of questions that really help to develop your case.
So devil's advocate is a great way to kind of tease out, that's what I'm hearing from you there. In addition to the fact that, you know, if you're doing your focus groups correctly, you're going to get some negative responses, is to play devil's advocate when you get a negative response and find out if there's any change. If there's no change and they're stuck on that opinion, then you know what, that's a person that maybe, actually, let me ask you that. If the person is stuck on that opinion, stuck in that, can you extrapolate anything from them, either demographically or personal history wise, that you can then use to determine whether that person's a bad juror or just, I don't know, just that person is not for you, whether it's a demographic thing or that person. Does that make sense? My question?
I'm struggling to understand your question.
Yeah. Well, so if somebody gives you a negative response and you try to play the devil's advocate to see if they're committed to that response or if, you know, or how committed to that response that they are, right?
Right.
If they maintain 100% commitment to that response, can you from there extrapolate from their demographics or their personal history what other jurors might also be negative, like that you might not want on your jury?
You can begin to, right? I mean, when you present a narrative style focus group, it doesn't really matter. You present any focus group or you're presenting it at trial, they're going to make up their minds about you and your case. They're just like that, right? And uprooting that initial impression is difficult. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So, the code for plaintiff lawyer, if you tell them they're going to see something and then they don't see it, if you don't tell them something and then the other side comes in and says it for the first time and they believe it's significant and you've left it out and they think it's because you're hiding it from them, then that can shift things, right? But the initial imprint, you can't really ignore the importance of that, right? So in a narrative style focus group, somebody is poo-pooing all over my case, and I start diving into those experiences. Yeah, I mean, you're logging that information for the future. I would hesitate to say that those experiences, because of one narrative style focus group, is somebody that you get into jury selection and you got to strike those people. You got to go after them for cause or whatever. I don't believe in that, right? Because what I believe in is that person reached a blink impression about the case based on the way that I chose to present the case. And oftentimes human beings are just unwilling to come off their initial imprint, right? So no, now, once you start getting into the more adversarial, kind of getting down, you do one narrative, and depending on the value of the case, people are like, well, I can't do these 20 focus groups like Don can. Well, number one, not every case justifies 20 focus groups. Number two, just as a side note, you can collaborate with other lawyers and reduce the cost to you and your client. So arguably, I would argue there's little to no excuse for doing multiple focus groups. But sometimes the case only requires maybe 2-3 focus groups at most. So you're going from narrative to opening, maybe to full adversarial. Once you get more into the adversarial style, if you're getting these negative feedback, then what you want to see is, all right, let's compare these prior experiences, right, to this person's experiences. Are we seeing some connection at that point? Then the answer to your question is yes. As far as demographics go, I think there's a lot of stock put in demographics that may be largely misleading. I'm not saying demographics have nothing to do with nothing. But in the time I was with Don, tried however many cases we tried, there was a case out in Vegas involving a case against UPS. UPS, puts this guy, I don't know, puts him on the road and puts way too much pressure on him, and he winds up running over. I don't remember if she was a widow or if she just lived alone, but
she was like an old maid, like a
older woman, right?
Right, yeah.
And we ran however many focus groups on that case. It was a lot. But in every case where there was either a widow or an old maid on our focus group, and I don't remember, let's pick an age. It was like 55 or older female who was not married. They just killed our case, right? And it didn't matter where we focused the case, whether it was Atlanta, whether it was Florida, whether it was Vegas. That was just a consistent demographic that at some point, Don and I went back and forth trying to figure it out. And we could throw out this, that, and the other as far as the reasons why, but at the end of the day, it really didn't matter the reason why, because that demographic was going to kill us. And so that's kind of the one example I can give of where a key demographic, short of like a banker or, a tech guy or, something like that kind of is a more analytical mindset. You really want to hone in on those folks, obviously. Or you're working or you're suing the oil company, and the oil company, employs 95% of 95% of the town, obviously that changes things. But yeah, I don't necessarily say, all right, here's a narrative style focus group. This person's experiences, I can go off of that and trust that when I go into jury selection. No. Once you get into the more adversarial, that's a different story.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Yeah. And it takes a long time to kind of develop that pattern, right? I mean, I'm assuming because it sounds like at least in that UPS one you did a lot. I mean, there are some things we know that women are terrible and you're a jury for a rape case, for example. Not all, but that's, tends to be kind of that negative attribution. I never would have been there. I never would have done that. I never would have had this happen to me kind of stuff. But demographics as that goes.
And I don't mean to cut you off. Forgive me. I'm not trying to be rude. But as far as this negative attribution, I would have never been there. I would have never done that. That's fine. Right? That's what I anticipate in an initial, like a rape case, let's say. And you got a female who says that, right? That doesn't necessarily, to me, scare me away from all female jurors, right? Because to me, it's like, all right, you presented this case in a neutral narrative style, and they've come back with these, negative feedback. Okay, fine. Now let's start to reorganize these facts so that no longer is it about your client and I would have never done what your client did. Now you're presenting it in a way where, yeah, it could happen to you, right? And so because this was completely out of her control. And so I don't know if I'm necessarily convinced that, just because I run a narrative style focus group and this particular demographic's all against me, like in the UPS case, just because that initial focus group honed in on these, I wasn't convinced at that point, nor should you be convinced at that point, but by the time you've done as many as we did, you're like, yeah, well, we can't live with these people. And so I still believe that you can shift that kind of fundamental point of view of, well, that would have never been me, this, that, and the reason. That's true about anything. That's true about any case. A product liability case where you have this, piece that attached. We had a case where it was a piece that attached to a weed eater that you look at it and you're like, there's no way on God's green earth I would use that thing, right? It just looks like it's going to break, right? But once you start learning about all the different OSIs out there, they knew about it. You start getting all these different reviews on their website, notifying them of it. All the different photos that different folks who have been injured prior to your guy are sending to these people. And then that changes everything, right? Because it's not anymore about, and then you learn about what other products this larger company produces, right? The parent company produces, and you start to see the web. Then it doesn't really become about this ugly piece that nobody would ever use. It's about the danger presented by this particular entity. And so you can still shift that, but you have to be willing to listen to the people who are negative about it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And it can't be from one thing. It's got to be developed over time after trying all the different stuff that you can on your case. And then you might
as much as the case value justifies it. Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, we have a couple of questions from the audience, and I want to get to them before we get too far down the road here. So JR asks, as you mentioned connections, how much is truly the facts versus the storytelling? I know in an unbiased world, only facts matter, but people are people. So I think the question is, how much of the information we're getting is based on the facts and versus just the way they're presented?
I don't know if I understand the distinction.
Yeah, well, I'll read it again and we'll see if we can parse it out. And JR, if you're out there and you have a better way, some clarification that might be helpful. As you mentioned connections, how much is truly the facts versus the storytelling? That's the question.
Well,
so yeah, maybe JR.
Yeah.
Do you want to send us a clarification? JR, we'll try to.
Because it seems like we're steering off into another topic, right? I mean, if we're talking about connections that are made during trial, during jury selection, within the focus groups that you can then use in jury selection, that's a whole other topic, right? I mean, yeah, I strongly encourage that you use focus groups to help you with jury selection. And you don't necessarily have to just run a quote jury selection focus group, but you can begin to craft your questions that create the connections in your particular case from the outset. But that we're steering off into other territory.
All right. Well, if that's what you're asking, JR, it might be a little bit not quite on topic. Otherwise, go ahead and type out.
Happy to talk with you, JR, about that. But yeah, no, that's a completely different topic. Different topic.
All right. And then Yuri Gargantua asks, what does scare you about women? Well, I feel like that's a very Interesting. I think he means maybe yes, jurors or focus group members, not in general.
Nothing. No, that demographic is nothing. No.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I technically am the one who brought it up, and I have, we've had several experiences where just depending on, and it's not something that's unsurmountable. It's something that you have to figure out how you're going to deal with, right? And it's not just women. It's with what it might be like, for example, what Andrew was talking about with women who are 55 or whatever, for that particular case, right? There's not really a blanket anybody for anything. I hate it when people say like, oh my gosh, we're in a conservative venue, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, just figure out what they want and give it to them. It's the same thing. But I will say that I have to remind myself consistently that when you have like an attractive female plaintiff, and then you have to look at what's going on with your jurors, there are tensions there that are important to understand. But again, that's going to be case by case. And
let me say this about rural venues, because this one kind of hits home for me. I grew up in a small town, a very rural town, a quote unquote very conservative town. I think that there is a great misconception about these venues.
I agree.
I believe that, and I have seen it not only in focus groups, but in trials. These venues can oftentimes, I would argue, be better than the quote unquote plaintiff friendly venues. The only distinction is that I find is, there may be stronger, as far as the plaintiff code, right? There may be stronger in those venues. But as long as you're mindful of that, number one, what I've found in those venues and growing up, we grew up where everybody talks down to you. Folks who aren't from around there are very condescending. Mm-hmm. They act like they know what you want, what you like, what you value. And they just expect you to be submissive to their belief. And it gets old. I can testify, it gets old. And it's incredibly frustrating, and it creates a lot of anger. And I think we see that on a national level, state level, local level. You see a lot of that anger. And so that, if you understand that that's there, and you're coming into that, they're no less worried or no less concerned about safety than anybody else, right? And if anything, they value life significantly more. All you have to do is learn how to speak to them. Number one, you learn that through focus groups, right? You grow up in these people are like, well, I grew up in Atlanta my whole life, and I don't know, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter where you grow up, right? They may come in with preconceived notions of you, but you can uproot those, right? You can discard those away by going off code. And then the next thing is you have to present them a case that justifies that they get out of it. They get something out of it. Like we have a case right now up against the city of Helen, and it's your, lawyers would describe it as your typical sidewalk trip and fall. It's not, because the city of Helen knew about this dangerous condition and knew about it for years. They knew about it for frickin' years, and they knew people were getting hurt. They had come out to the scene multiple times. Ambulances had taken people away from the scene, and they chose to do nothing, right? And then it's on a private property, arguably. That's somewhat in dispute. And so now what you have is once our gal, of course, tripped and fell, and seriously injured herself. Now, after the lawsuit's filed, for the very first time, the city's pointing over at the private property and saying it's your property, despite the private property owners coming over time and time again saying, fix, something needs to happen, and nobody does anything. Now you have this. Well, it's not my responsibility because it's quote unquote public sidewalk and they should have fixed it. And it's kind of like, well, it's on your property. Mm-hmm. And then you have the city who's sitting there saying, no, it's your property. You should have maintained it despite the fact that the city knew about it and had maintained the sidewalk for some time. Not to mention all their different representations to the private property owners that they would fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So in that instance, I'm walking into a venue that's very distrustful of government,
Mm-hmm.
has very strong feelings about government. And I have a government that not only is letting down its people, but does not care that it does so, is pointing the finger at one of its own, right? Helen, for anybody who's from around here, is like 90 to 95% dependent on tourism. Those businesses in there are 90 to 95% dependent on tourism, which means you got folks coming in from all over that aren't familiar with that. It's not like my hometown where everybody knew every little inch of a sidewalk. You got people coming in that don't. And now you got a government pointing a finger at one of those businesses saying it's their fault. So, I mean, you got the property owner, your property, your responsibility. You got that going in. That's bubble law. That's strong. But the stronger emotion is going to be the government that, aren't you sick and tired of this?
Yeah.
Right? Whether it happens on a local level, you've got city officials and commissioners that have been in these positions for 30, 40 years, right? You've got, they've made careers out of this, careers out of taking your money and doing nothing as people get hurt. And so you go into these rural venues, I think that you just have to, I don't know, to me, oftentimes your cases are so much stronger, so much better, and have a greater value if you just present it in these edge-like ways.
Yeah.
Simple, straightforward. Don't tell them what they know or don't know. They know it. Those focus groups are going to tell you what they know. Those focus groups are going to tell you what they believe and how strongly they know and believe those things. And so you just got to trust the focus group and go forward, right? And so it gives them the opportunity to do what they've always wanted to do and never been able to do. They're screaming at the top of their lungs. Many people on this may be sitting there saying, why do these people elect whoever, whether it's state level or federal level? And I sit there and say, because we've been screaming for years, right? And if we have to send a bull into a china shop, then that's what we do,
yep.
Right? Because nobody's listening to everything. Here's the opportunity for them to do something. Here's the opportunity for them to empower themselves and make their community safer, or without punitives. Obviously, you can't use these words of send a message, but they can, through full accountability, a full and fair verdict, speak on behalf of this community about what will and will not be tolerated. Those arguments are, Don would often say, you can walk up to that line. If you know where the law is in your state, you can walk up to that line without crossing it. And so I can make a send a message argument without ever using that language. And in those venues, that's powerful. And so I love those venues.
Yep. I'm always envious of people who get to practice in those venues. I can't wait until we practice all over the state of Washington, and the eastern side is more conservative, but on our listserv, we constantly have people, I'm just thinking of one right now, and they were like, oh my God, we have a case in Spokane County and it's against the police, and those dumb conservatives out there, they like the police. There's no way we can win. They got a $16 million verdict against the local police with the local jury, because right. Guess what? The guy was doing awful, awful things. And abuse of power for a more conservative venue is so much more important because of, like you just said, Andrew, that, we conservatives don't like abuse of power. Nobody does, right? Let's not even put it, nobody does. But if it's the government that's abusing power, to be able to finally have the moment to hold them accountable, which half the time you can't do through voting, half the time you can't do on the other way. It really is really, really empowering, and it can result in these massive verdicts that I think a lot of lawyers just assume is never going to happen. And Yuri asked another question about saying, would you say living in the rural South makes it hard? If so, how hard is it? I'm going to just straight up say living in the liberal Pacific Northwest is really effing hard. We don't get big verdicts up here, not only because we don't have punitives, but because people don't think it's their responsibility to do anything about what's going on. They say, oh, well, the government will take care of that, or well, whatever will take care of that. And you talk to jurors who are sitting in your veneer and they're like, it's not my responsibility. I don't really care what's, somebody else is going to take care of it. So it's not for me to do. So Andrew, I'll let you answer that question about living in the rural South. Is it hard?
Yeah.
How hard is it? But
I guess I just don't get, I'm not saying venue is not important, right? What I am saying is I guess I don't put as much stock in it when it comes to trying a case. When it comes from the perspective of settling a case, yeah, it can make it more difficult or it can make it easier. When it comes to trying a case, I think there's pros and cons either way. That's where the focus groups come in, right? You find out where those emotional buttons are, and I don't care where you're running the focus group. I could run a focus group up in Washington and find out the emotional buttons, and I can guarantee you that those emotional buttons will be, if it's not all of them, some of those that I'm hearing down here in Georgia. Then the question becomes, all right, now that I'm hearing this in whether it's rural Washington, urban Georgia, whatever, now as we get closer to trial, let's do a boots on the ground focus group there, and let's find out, all right, we know these are the emotional buttons, but let's figure out what's our top two, right? And how we can frame it, or to answer that person's question, tell the story in a way that's going to elicit the strongest emotion from those particular emotional buttons. So it doesn't matter if you have, quote, government corruption or not, right? That's one issue. But it could be your quote unquote run of the mill car wreck case, right? And empower them through accountability, statistics, this is the rules of the road. We all know this. They ain't got to go into all that. But here's your opportunity to do something, right? Because again, I go back to, for so long, we've been beaten down and made to feel like there's just nothing you can do about anything. And then the other side of it is, in the focus groups, you can find out, particularly boots on the ground focus groups, what they value and how they, and then in the closing argument, you're going to say, once you find out what they value, then it comes down to challenging them. After you've empowered them, challenge them of, all right, we reflect our values by how we value them, right? But you're not going to necessarily get to those values until you really dove into this focus group, and you're not going to really find out the strength of those values until you listen to the negative side of your case.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to then change that POV. That's going to take that, if it's a car wreck case and you're at a 2 or something, that yanks it up to a 5 or a 6 or a 7. All right, now I'm up here on liability. Now let's find out what they want to know about my client.
Right.
Let's find out what things matter in their community. Let's find out what their passions are and why, right? Those are the types of things that you can start to move into once you've listened to the negative feedback on your case. Revise that, give them what they're looking for. Now it's like, okay, that wouldn't be me. The whole, well, everybody texts and drives, so what's the big deal? Well, the reality is most folks will come in behind and say, yeah, but I text and drive safely, which is bullshit, right? They don't. None of us do who text and drive. We may all text and drive. Probably most of us do. And just because we haven't caused a wreck doesn't mean we haven't had close calls. And so, I say all this to say you don't get to the empowerment of a jury until you've understood the negative side of their feelings, because the only way you're going to empower that jury is if you're giving them what they need. And I would argue, others feel differently, I feel like, I would argue the only way that I find out what they need is by going to a focus group and asking them. Period. I don't care if I've tried a million different product liability cases. I'm still going to go and ask, because every case has its own unique set of facts.
Absolutely. And you'll learn all kinds of different things from the focus group as well. You may present it and feel like it's super strong and great. And they're going to be like, well, what about this other thing over here? And you're like, oh my gosh, all of that stuff. And when we call these things negative responses, it's not even necessarily always negative. Sometimes it's just like thought provoking, but you want to use that as an opportunity to shape your case, shape your discovery, maybe shape some decisions you make kind of moving forward, depositions, all of that stuff. And go from there.
Well, here's the other thing I would say, and I think I like your word, Jenna, and I may just steal it from you, heads up. But and forgive the noise in the background, but, it might be better for us to start looking at instead of saying this negative, right? And start referring to them as opportunities, because that's really what they are. I mean, they're really good stuff. Whenever we would run focus groups, I mean, when I was with Don, we were running them sometimes 2-3 times a week, right? And we go back into his smoke room and talk about the focus groups from that day. And we never really talked about, quote unquote, I mean, we said negative attribution, right? But it really was about, all right, this is good shit. Let's figure out what we do with it.
Yeah.
And that would help guide how we move the case forward. So it's really better to look at it from a positive perspective, because and maybe that would help some lawyers who are feeling like they're getting gut punched and their cases are crashing and burning and, oh my goodness, the sky's falling. It's really not. They're giving you great information that you need so that you can give a jury what they need to go do the job you want them to do.
Yep, absolutely. Exactly. And maybe we'll start talking about it that way. And maybe when others say, I got negative responses, we say, well, let's think about how that might be a helpful, positive thing moving forward. All right. So I know that there's some something going on at KTI. So we kind of have to wrap up a couple minutes early, but there's one more question from Jan. It says, great insight, Andrew. What's more important in these cases, emotional buttons or physical buttons? So what say you?
I need a definition of physical buttons, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, I would say, I don't know so hopefully you're not touching your jury or your family members, but if I understand the question correctly, Jan, and feel free, please, to send out some clarification, but emotional buttons are the most important thing
100%.
Ultimately. I mean, the logical things, the facts, that sort of stuff, that all drives the emotion. And so that's what Andrew was saying earlier. If you've got a 2 out of 10 emotional scale on a case, you've got to figure out why it's there, how you can move it up to a 7 or an 8. If you've got like a 10 or 11 on emotional scale, but your facts are kind of crappy, I mean, you're kind of in a pretty good place, better than if your facts are awesome and you're at that 2 in emotional scale. Does that make sense, Andrew? Do you agree?
Well, it's just one of those things like, I mean, yeah, emotion drives the case. So that's a given. Where I fear lawyers get themselves in trouble, just based on experience with KTI, as well as, lawyers come in and we run focus groups for them, again, in that group setting where we split the costs, right? And so we'll run focus groups for them. And where I see folks get themselves in trouble is when they think they know where it is. So, again, just because you're getting negative feedback doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, this is a bad fact, right? Oh, this is a good fact. Blah. No, you don't really know out of the narrative focus group. The narrative focus group is merely giving you an opportunity to plug potential holes. And once those holes are plugged, let's find out whether or not these facts are truly bad or truly good. Let's let that come out of the wash. And once you kind of get past that, now you can start to be like, all right, here are our top 1, 2, 3. Really out of a narrative, I'm looking for those holes and I'm looking for what more information they want to know. And I'm looking for, their gut check. I don't really care if it's a 2, 3, or a 10. I want to know why. And then I want to know who they want to hear from and why. And if, what would they expect that person to say? And so, or even better yet, if you were the lawyer, what questions would you ask the person?
Yeah.
And so, the narrative is you're not there to win it. You're just there to soak up as much information as you possibly can. And the more you can just shut up, the more information you'll get. And I'll tell you, we talked about devil's advocate. I know we got to end here, whatever. We talked about devil's advocate as being a strong tool. And you're right. I think the strongest tool in your tool belt is silence. Because I'll tell you, it makes people so uncomfortable. And the more you kind of move in closer to somebody, like this, the more uncomfortable they get. And so if you're able to embrace the uncomfortability, which I would encourage everybody to do, because you're going to feel uncomfortable in silence, it's human nature, but you will feel less, I can guarantee you feel less uncomfortable than they do. Because they have this feeling of, I'm here to talk, I'm supposed to talk, now I'm not talking. Sooner or later, somebody's going to pop. So, whether it's 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, I think I've gone as long as 60 or 90 seconds. Just let them sit there and sizzle until somebody can't take it anymore. Instead of going in like lawyers want to do, fill in that void. Okay, let me re-ask my question. Let me ask another question. No, yeah, you asked a question for a reason. Stand by and wait till somebody responds. Yep. So shut up and listen.
Shut up and listen. Great advice. Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. I appreciate you being on with us today and answering questions and telling us your opinions on how to kind of parse through some of the information that we're getting from our focus groups. And of course, as always, thank you to all of you who joined us live for this week's episode of Fridays with Keenan's Cutting Edge. If you liked the episode, please give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up for alerts so you don't miss an episode. Next week, we're moving a little bit in a different direction from our kind of more traditional lawyer, legal type guests. And we have a woman named Tricia Keffer. She is going to talk to us about how to enrich our lives through plants. She was a special guest invited by Papa Don to talk with us because he's utilizing some of her skill set within his environment lately. And so I'm excited to hear from Tricia about holistic and spiritual and physical placement of plants in your life in order to help us be more healthy, balanced, and happy. So I look forward to next week. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time.